The night was quiet, except for the soft hum of crickets, and the distant sound of waves kissing the shore. Clara Jennings sat by her window, her Bible open but unread. The candle beside her flickered, casting long shadows across the room. She had prayed so many times in this exact spot, on her knees, with her hands trembling, her heart pleading. But lately, her prayers felt like whispers lost to the wind. It had been a year since she lost her husband, Michael. A year since everything she knew about faith, love, and hope had been tested in the fire of grief. Once, she was known for her joyful spirit, the woman who prayed for everyone, the one people came to when they needed comfort. But now, she could barely pray for herself. Each night, she'd sit by the window, whisper a few words, and then fall silent, her tears doing the talking her lips could not. God, she murmured that night, her voice breaking. I don't even know what to say anymore. I just miss him. And I miss you. The wind rustled the trees outside, but heaven seemed still. Clara lived in a small seaside town called Maple Bay, where the church bell rang every morning at 8, and neighbors still waved to each other in passing. She worked as a librarian at the town's old reading house, a quiet place with shelves that smelled of paper and time. It was peaceful there, but also lonely. Every book she shelved, every empty page she turned, reminded her of prayers unanswered. She missed the days when she could feel God in everything. In laughter, in sunsets, in the warmth of Michael's hand during prayer. Now all she felt was silence. But one Friday morning, something changed. An elderly man named Mr. Lewis, who often visited the library, noticed the sadness in her eyes. He approached her as she was placing books on the top shelf. "You look like someone carrying 1,000 prayers with no answers," he said kindly. Clara blinked, startled. "Something like that," she admitted with a faint smile. He nodded. "You know, sometimes grace hides in the unanswered prayers. Sometimes silence is where God does his best work." His words lingered in her mind all day. Grace in unanswered prayers. She couldn't see it. Not yet. But something in her heart stirred, like an ember flickering back to life. That evening, Clara walked down to the beach. The same one she and Michael used to visit at sunset. The sky was painted in hues of lavender and gold, and the waves rolled gently like a living hymn. She sat on a rock and closed her eyes. "Lord," she whispered, "if you're still here, teach me how to pray again. I don't want fancy words. I just want you." For a long time, there was nothing but the sound of the sea. Then, quietly, she felt something. Not a voice, not a miracle, but a calmness that wrapped around her like an invisible embrace. And in that stillness, a phrase formed in her heart. Graceful prayers aren't about being perfect. They're about being honest. She took a deep breath, and began to speak softly into the night. "God, I'm broken. I'm tired. But I still believe you're good. Even when I don't understand, help me keep talking to you." Her words melted into the wind. And for the first time in a long while, she felt that maybe, just maybe, someone was listening. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn. She brewed coffee, wrapped herself in a shawl, and opened her journal. The pages had been blank for months, but now she began to write. Graceful Prayer 1. Lord, when I can't find the words, hear my heart. She smiled faintly as she finished the line. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Each day after that, she wrote a new prayer. Some were long, some were just a sentence. Some were questions. Others were confessions. But each one was raw and real. Graceful Prayer A to Z. Thank you for today, even though it hurts. Graceful Prayer Hand 3. If I can't see the way ahead, let me walk by your light, one step at a time. With every prayer, she felt something inside her shift. A slow, gentle healing. A few weeks later, the church announced a community prayer night. Clara hesitated to go. The thought of praying in front of others terrified her. She barely managed to pray alone. But something within whispered, "Go." That evening, she sat quietly in the back pew, listening as people prayed aloud. Some thanked God for blessings, others cried out for help. When it was her turn, she froze. Her heart pounded. Then, without overthinking, she spoke. "Lord," she began softly, "I don't have fancy words tonight. Just, thank you for not leaving me, even when I stopped talking. I'm still learning how to pray again. But I think you're teaching me grace in the silence." Her voice broke. But her heart felt light. The room was silent, reverent. Some wiped tears. Afterward, the pastor approached her. "That," he said gently, "was the most beautiful prayer we've heard in a long time." Clara smiled through tears. "It wasn't me," she whispered. "It was grace." In the months that followed, Clara's prayers began to change. Not in words, but in depth. She prayed while walking to work, while folding laundry, while sitting with a lonely widow at the library. Prayer was no longer something she did. It was something she lived. She started a small journal group at the church, calling it Graceful Prayers for the Soul. It was a space for anyone struggling to pray, anyone who felt unheard, anyone who needed to remember that God was still close. They met every Thursday night in the church basement. There were candles, soft music, and open hearts. No one had to sound holy. No one had to pretend. The first night, only 5 people came. By the third month, there were 20. Each person shared their graceful prayers. Simple, human words that came from the soul. "I'm angry, Lord. But I still want to believe. Thank you for not letting go of me. Even in the dark, I know you're the light." Clara listened, tears often in her eyes. The room was full of people who had once thought God had gone silent. And yet, here they were, finding Him in each other's voices. One evening after the group meeting, Clara lingered in the church. The candles flickered softly, casting warm light across the walls. She knelt at the altar, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. "Lord," she prayed, "thank you for every unanswered prayer that led me here. For every tear that became a seed of grace. I don't know what tomorrow brings, but I trust that you're already there." A deep peace filled her. The kind that can't be explained, only felt. Months turned into a year. Clara's journal had grown thick with pages of prayers. Joyful ones, broken ones, hopeful ones. She decided to publish it, not for fame, but to help others who felt lost in their own silences. The book, Graceful Prayers for the Soul, found its way into homes, hospitals, and prisons. People wrote letters saying her words helped them pray again. Helped them believe again. One letter came from a young woman named Hannah, who had lost her father, and nearly given up on faith. "I thought God had forgotten me," Hannah wrote. "But your story reminded me that even when we're silent, grace is still speaking." Clara pressed the letter to her heart, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, "for turning my pain into prayer, and my prayer into purpose." A year later, on the anniversary of Michael's passing, Clara walked back to the same beach, where she had once begged God to teach her how to pray again. The sea was calm, the air cool and clear. she brought her old prayer journal with her. Sitting on the sand, she flipped through the pages. Each one a piece of her journey. Every word, every tear, had built a bridge between despair and peace. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she whispered softly, "I finally understand, Michael. Grace isn't something we wait for. It's something we become." She closed the journal and stood. The waves reached up to her feet, cool and gentle, as if reminding her that God's love, like the sea, never stopped moving, even when unseen. Clara lifted her hands slightly, her heart full. "Lord," she prayed, "thank you for teaching me that grace doesn't mean I never break. It means you hold me together when I do." The last light of the sun kissed the water, and the world seemed to exhale. Years later, people in Maple Bay would still speak of her. The woman who turned her heartbreak into hope, who taught a town how to pray again. The graceful prayers for the soul gatherings continued long after she'd grown older, passed on by others she'd touched. And somewhere beyond the veil of this life, in a place where prayers never end, Clara's voice still rises. Soft, steady, full of grace. Because the most beautiful prayers, she once said, aren't the ones heaven answers. They're the ones that change the heart that prays them.